Well, hello again. Here we are exploring who we are as consciousness. What we're working on right now is really looking at those 4 steps we can take whenever stress strikes. So remember, stress again is the gap, the space between what is and what we would love to have happen. So what I wanted to mention today is that the 4 steps are grounded in what's called reciprocal inhibition in terms of brain physiology and behavioral therapy. And reciprocal inhibition means that when the brain and the body are engaged in the relaxation response, that inhibits the anxiety response. And then when the brain and body are engaged in the assertive response, that also inhibits the anxiety response. So the 4 steps are structured with that in mind. And in my research, as I mentioned before, we measured stress in terms of the tension between what is and what we'd love to have happen. That tension in terms of skin temperature, to measure the blood flow. If the blood is flowing freely, the muscles, the little muscles, the smooth muscles around the blood vessels are not tense, and so the skin temperature is warmer. And the other measure is skeletal muscle, which is the EEG, which measures the tension in the big muscle groups. So what I found in my research was that when we brought simple awareness, just noticing that we were tense, that activated what Dr. Charles Strobel said in his work, that the quieting response, QR versus ER. So most of us, are getting up in the morning and next thing you know, we're in the emergency response, which isn't necessary, the fight or flight response, to deal with the stresses of the day, because most of the stresses really require an alert mind and a relaxed body. It's not the stress of a saber-toothed tiger coming at us. Now, when we need the emergency response, like a car swerving toward us, we jump out of the way, that's there. And after the traumatic event, we return to a quieting response, to a homeostasis, an inner balance. Now, the thing is, we can facilitate and activate that quieting response, and that through the breathing and through our shifting the focus and our energy in the second step, the STOP, in the O, the observing of the gap, and seeing what our emotions are telling us and what we can do to close the gap. And then P, proceed to close the gap, or pray as reminding you to your higher power, to God, please help me see this situation in new light so I can. And then exhale, let go of my pain, my stress, my anger, fear, whatever, and find peace and resolution. And then after that, we talked about looking for synchronicity. And as a little aside, before we get back to the physiology thing, I want to mention that the example of a good example of synchronicity was a young man was telling me he had moved from the East Coast out to Colorado, and he was at one point feeling, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know if this is a good place to be. Should I stay out here, or am I going nowhere? And about that time, a truck came barreling down the 2-lane highway he was on, and he swerved off onto a lane off to the side. And he was stressed, and he looked up and happened to notice a sign, and it said, nowhere lane. At that moment, he decided that was a sign, that was a synchronicity. It was time for him to go back, because he wasn't going anywhere in his venture out west. Okay, so the idea of that these steps are based on, called reciprocal inhibition, really involves that when the body and the mind, the physiology of the brain is such that when you're engaging in the relaxation response, that inhibits the anxiety response. And if you're engaged in an assertive response, that also inhibits the anxiety response. So when you're breathing in with S, big red stop sign, stop, breathing in cool, I can keep my mind cool. I stop and still my mind and keep my mind cool. Breathing out, I stop and still my body and keep my body calm. Breathing in, I can keep my mind cool and my body calm no matter what. And then you proceed with cools and calms. Now that begins to facilitate the relaxation response. And that is going to help with relaxing the big muscle groups, okay? Now, just the breath. Now, when you're imagining a wave of warmth and heaviness and using these thoughts before you do the exhale. So breathing in cool, I can keep my mind cool. And then before exhaling, just think, and as I let my jaw, tongue, and shoulders go limp and feel a wave of warmth and heaviness flowing down through my body, I can keep my body calm no matter what. So you can't say all that, but you can give a quick thought to jaw, tongue, shoulders go limp, and a wave of warmth and heaviness. So using the concept of a wave of warmth and heaviness, what that does, that imagery helps to relax the smooth muscles around the blood vessels, leading to vasodilation versus vasoconstriction. Okay, so the next thing that happens with the T, my anxiety is telling me I would hate it if I flunked this test, and that's because I would love it to pass it with honors. Okay, now, what you're doing there is you're taking a passive, paralyzing position of being anxious and using the hate word or don't like or don't want to assert yourself. And that begins to take the paralyzed emotion and give you movement to, I would hate this to happen. That's because I would love this to happen. And it opens you up. You're breathing more. You're in the relaxation response. You're in the assertive response. And then you're continuing in the assertive response when you observe the gap, see what you can do about it. If you can do something, do it. That is, go to P and proceed, or pray and ask for guidance, ask to have this relieved by seeing it in a new light. And then you're looking for these signs around you. And one of the things that I learned a lot about synchronicity was with my time with the Maya, the Mayans, the Mayan shamans, which at some point we'll get into, and that's in my other book, A Matter of Love. But they told us that, help is everywhere when you learn to look. And there's synchronicities all the time. And that's sort of the way the universe is unfolding for our growth, for our health, to help us. Okay, so just so you realize, those 4 steps then are grounded in that concept. It's also of brain physiology, the reciprocal inhibition, inhibiting the anxiety with breathing and inhibiting it with assertiveness. Okay, so the relaxation response blocks anxiety and the assertive response blocks anxiety, and then you're able to be more effective in what you're going to do. So the question is, what are you going to fill the space with? Anxiety, fear, sadness, depression, or are you going to fill it with the expansive energy, peaceful power of a love focus instead of a fear focus? Because what you focus on, you tend to gravitate toward. So as I talked about the 2 examples with golf, hitting the ball over the water hole and onto the green, focusing on the green instead of the water hole, and the same thing with making baskets at the end of a basketball game, foul shots. Focusing on making the shot, not going back and forth. I'm afraid I'm going to miss it. I'm going to make it. Just get full expression to what you'd hate to have happen and love to have happen. Okay, so the other thing this is based on is the ABCs of emotional and mental health that was first brought out by Albert Ellis, the famous psychologist in New York. And what Ellis said was, whenever, all through the day, you can try this. There's the activating event, and then there's the consequence, what I feel, what I feel in my heart. And so that's A and C. And a lot of times you just think A causes C. The prospect of failing a test is causing me to feel anxious. But the answer lies in there. The answer lies in B. What am I believing? So A, activating event. C, consequence, emotional consequence. B, what am I telling myself to get myself anxious? And D, I can dispute that and see what I can tell myself that would make me just maybe mildly nervous and still motivated to do well in a test, but not paralyzed with anxiety. So I'm afraid I'm going to flunk this test. Stop. What am I telling myself? I'm afraid I'm going to flunk this test. No, I don't want to flunk this test. I'd hate to flunk it, and that's because I would love to do really well. Okay, what can I do? Let me take some time today. Let me review the different things that I have to review. So you're actively inhibiting the anxiety response by just simply some nice calming self-talk. D, you could call that disputing. And then E leads to an effective outcome. So from point A to C to what am I telling myself at B? And what am I telling myself to make myself depressed, whatever the negative emotion. And then challenge that with D. I'm telling myself I can't go on, I can't last this way, I miss this person too much, whatever, this loss, this love I've lost. Instead, stop, do the breathing and so forth, and then you're challenging the B. So most people think it's always the events. Well, it'd be nice if the events weren't there. It'd be nice if coronavirus wasn't there, but it is. And it's an interesting thing that Buddha, 2,500 years ago, a spiritual teacher I heard, said this. I hadn't known this about the Buddha. But he said, when we suffer, we have two arrows. The first arrow is the event, and the second arrow is the internal reaction. That's what we can do something about, in effect, to try to pull the first arrow out of our, out of us in terms of, to feel better. Okay, so let's take a look at one of the big issues with the coronavirus, besides the fear that we might contract it ourselves. So let's say we've lost a loved one, and that has happened. And so with the loss of a loved one, we can also apply these steps and eventually try to heal the loss with gratitude. So for example, I was sitting with these 80-year-old people, a couple who had just found each other after the loss of their spouses of 50 years, and another woman who had lost hers many years before. These two had lost it just recently, but this woman had lost it 30 years before. And they were very much in love. And so as these two had found each other, they were giving each other permission to call the other by the spouse's name, and they were just companions. They weren't like finding some tremendous love. They had the love of their lives, and they'd lost them. So this other woman was saying, as she listened to them, she burst into tears, and she bent over and she said, "A day doesn't go by that I'll never stop missing him." And I said to her, take a moment now, and as you say, "I'll never stop missing him," try to say the sentence, add the sentence, and that's because and picture him, "I'll never stop loving you." Now notice the difference between "I'll never stop missing him," which is contracted, and "I'll always love you." See how that feels in the body. So when she shifted back to her tears stopped and just came to an acceptance. I'm always going to love him. There's never going to be a time I'm not going to love him. And another example was I was on national television following 9/11, and this young man had lost his father in the attack on the buildings, the World Trade Center, and his father was a first responder. And it was Tuesday. We were recording the show, and the event happened on. Sunday we recorded the show. On Tuesday the event had happened. And he was up on the stage with Jan Levant Sant, the show host, and he was holding out. His name was Stephen, as my name is, and he was holding out the hope that his father was still alive, even though it's Sunday. And the mother and the sister are saying, "Stephen, he's not going to be alive. You have to face this." When he came back into the audience, where I was, he actually had been sitting next to me. I didn't know who he was at the time. So he came back and he was sitting next to me. And I said to him, I said, "Stephen, you're never going to not love your husband, your father. You're never going to stop loving him. Your mother's never going to stop loving her husband." Okay. Now, because you're never going to stop loving him, there's going to be times you're going to feel angry, sad, depressed. And what you can do at that time is stop, take a breath, picture your father and say, my feeling depressed, my feeling angry that you're not here is telling me I hate it that you're not here with me now. And that's because I would love it if you were here with me now. And he used to love having pizza and Pepsi with his father on Sunday nights. So the statement would be, I hate you're not here to have pizza and Pepsi with me, and I would love it if you were here to have pizza and Pepsi with me. And then I suggested, go to your memories and say to him, I can remember how we did this and that. And like an old photo album, you open up and look at these memories and review them and get the feelings back again. They can never be taken from you. And then you can shift to, and always remembering this, I'm grateful for the time I had with you. I hate it I didn't have more time, but I love it, the time that I've had with you. So this doesn't happen just once. He may have to have said this any number of times and keep reminding himself, I hate you, I'd love it if you were here. I'm so grateful for the time I had. I wish I could have had more time. You feel contracted with that, but that's because I really love the time I had with you. So keep that in mind. And this week, just keep in mind, A, activating event, C, consequence. Do the exploration within your consciousness, within the vastness of your consciousness. Remember, we're looking at the peaceful and which is the mental aspect of your consciousness, the deeper you, and love, the emotional aspect of that consciousness. And joy, which is the joy of gratitude, in this case, for a lost loved one. You really feel the joy of what you once had with them. So with that, have a great week, and I'll see you next week.